Oops, shoot. Yikes. Something keeps happening where it keeps disconnecting.
Oh, it's not just like going to sleep.
I don't think so. Let me actually make sure that I have this, that it.
I'm gonna grab it.
I actually came in the back way, so.
Oh, okay. So something keeps happening that's making me nervous because it, I guess it's this, but it keeps disconnecting. I don't know if it's.
Disconnecting this for a second.
Okay.
And then what I may do is I may restart the system. Yeah,
This is the premier expert. So.
yeah. I'm gonna try restarting the system real quick.
Okay.
Somehow, like it loses touch.
Yeah, it forgot something. So
No, I just don't. I mean, I
moment.
just kind of slightly touched this,
And there was
then
probably
it.
nothing you were doing.
But it already had. I don't
It
think
might
that
it's
I had
probably
had
more
it.
like a time if it was sitting or something.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So
Right.
we're gonna reboot it. We should be fine after we reboot it. It'll take just a moment.
Okay. That always happens. All right.
And we'll start quite on time. So we'll see.
Slowly reboots here. Limber up. It's still waking up. Yep, it's coming. Just a second here.
Okay. I think it's fine.
It'll probably be fine once we get that far.
It's 3, 2, 1.
Yeah.
I'm glad this is happening now.
Yes.
Yes.
Much better now than later. I was sat in on a session while Farouk did this afternoon. He's in our music department. and he now is most of the time using an iPad for scores while he plays the piano. And he's got a foot pedal that he can advance and back up pages on the scores. And he says,
wow.
I always bring a paper copy with me.
Yeah, I'll be lost if I mean, in the sense that like all my stuff is now on this, I would have to print. I didn't bring a printed copy of what I'm going to say. But
We'll be
even
fine.
so,
We'll be fine. It's
I
just
can
taking a minute.
totally do whatever. It would just be.
Joshua Clover was here. His computer was so new that it like didn't even have the HDMI anymore. It was like the new Mac.
Oh yes, of
Something. It was
course.
Like, okay, so then we had to like, while the whole audience is here, like try to transfer it all to my computer to the web. There was a lot of like uncomfortable waiting to download.
Oh gosh.
We'll see how well this works. That's a good sign. We'll have you back up and running in a moment. Except, why is it not? Well, let's see here. Settings.
It should. I mean.
Okay. Show all displays, and it's not seeing
showing
the
it.
external one yet. Okay, now try.
Should we try switching to
That
the
looks.
We're up and
Okay,
running.
okay. I was gonna say to the VGA.
Okay.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
And
but
then you
that's
should-
true.
And then you should be able to go to slideshow mode and be up and running.
Okay.
Let's just double check that.
Let me just get rid of all this.
think
Okay,
you're
I will
back
do
in
my
business.
darndest to not knock anything.
You should be fine.
Okay.
All right, back out of your hair again. Have a great,
All right. Thank
great
you.
evening here.
Thank you.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
All right. I'm gonna give an introduction.
Okay. Should I go off?
I guess. I feel. I'll keep it brief. Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here for the third reading in the Visiting Writers series. Thank you to the English department and the Division of Arts and Humanities for supporting this reading, and mostly to all of you for being here with the support of your physical selves. Jennifer Scappettone, am I pronouncing that correctly? Good, I thought so. But is an interdisciplinary scholar and poet, and she's going to, well, reading is not nearly a sort of wide enough word, or we need to make it wider to think about what a reading is, but she's going to present her new book and things around the new book in various ways. And the book has the beautiful title, The Republic of Exit 43, Outtakes and Scores from an Archaeology and Pop-Up Opera of the Corporate Dump. And then following, we'll have a short break for some tea or a cookie, 5 to 7 minutes, precise. And then we're going to come back and talk. Jen's going to talk, and then it'll be opportunities for questions and conversation about the connection between poetry and research, or research and creative projects, which I think will be fantastic. I'll quickly mention a few of the things that Jennifer has done, including the author of the cross-genre verse book From Dame Quickly and Republic of Exit 43 that I mentioned, and also of the critical study Killing the Moonlight, Modernism in Venice. And she's translated the polyglot poet and musicologist Emilia Rosselli, and those were collected in Locomotrix. And she's also the founder of Pen Sound Italiana, an audiovisual archive of experimental Italian poetry. So you should all be, next long car trip, you should be listening to that. As you'll see soon, she's collaborated in various ways on site-specific works and worked with musicians, dancers, architects, code artists, and so on, which is an amazing thing about her work. And Now you'll forgive me, perhaps, for this, Jennifer, or perhaps you won't. Okay. Viola says in Twelfth Night, I prithee and I'll pay thee bounteously, conceal me what I am, and be my aid for such disguise as haply shall become the form of my intent. The very striking lines at the beginning when Viola is becoming transformed into a man, and hoping that I love that line, haply shall become, disguise as haply shall become the form of my intent. So one thing that disguise does. A little bit later she says, I am the man. This is when she's realizing Olivia is falling in love with her. I am the man, if it be so, as 'tis, poor lady, she were better love a dream. Disguise, I see thou art a wickedness, wherein the pregnant enemy does much. And because I've been reading and thinking about Twelfth Night, as many of my colleagues and student colleagues have, one of the things that Jennifer's book does is allow you to see things everywhere you look, right? So you're reading Twelfth Night and I'm thinking about the dump in various ways and disguise and what's beneath things, and that's a real gift of the book. In the section called A Garbage Arcadia, she says, rumor ekes out of the infrastructure of managed landscape, which in this context weirdly sounded to me like Shakespeare. Rumor eking out of a landscape. When regulation arrives decades late and impact reports prove inconclusive, it is gossip that helps us divine that the infrastructure of tragedy turns out to be one and the same as the infrastructure of abundance. And a little later on the same page, the poetic feet of the chorus evolve a contrapuntal relation to those of the looser marionettes of the deities on stage, like the gossip, expressing darkling secrets and anxieties that the actor cannot. So, this seemed to me to be sort of directly in some way describing the sort of double plots of Twelfth Night and the double plots of corporations and the double plots of lots of other things. And I loved feeling the contemporary energy of that, of Shakespeare coming through the reading of this book. And then one more little bit of Shakespeare, and then I will turn the mic over. Near the end, Feste the fool, a kind of one-person chorus himself, not to mention his lady's corrupter of words, says, why, some are born great, some achieve greatness, and some have greatness thrown upon them. I was one, sir, in this interlude, one Sir Topaz, sir, but that's all one. By the Lord fool, I am not mad, but do you remember? This is what he's reminding Malvolio what he said to him at the beginning. Madam, why you laugh at such a barren rascal, and you smile not, he's gagged. And thus the whirligig of time brings in his revenges. And that sort of turning, I heard echoing the chorus and its relation to the dump. And in today's context of preparing to hear from the Republic of Exit 43, and for many of us in the wake of reading it, we hear in Feste's revision of Malvolio's reading of Mariah's forged letter, the revision from thrust upon them, greatness is thrust upon them, to greatness is thrown upon them. Oop, I won't let that happen. A revision from an action of aggressive fertility thrust upon them, becoming a kind of dumping, from thrust to thrown, the whirligig of time circles. So all those pleasures become the dump. It is one of the great joys of this book and writer that books and situations and wires and grounds are all activated, and we, the readers, are encouraged to keep reading, keep seeing what's below and what pops up. The book teaches a practice of combining and fracturing, and digging and looking, and I, for one, am grateful for it. Please welcome Jennifer Scappettone.
I'm clapping for Rick. I'm going to sit up here and pretend that I'm at the bar, Thank you so much for that. I mean, I am a really huge fan of Shakespeare, as may be clear, since my first book of poems was named after a Shakespeare character filtered through Marx. but I have not thought about this in relation to Shakespeare, so that's the gift of other people reading your work. It's just amazing how that whole ecology works. So I'm just going to dig in, and the one thing that I would say is if you want to see everything that's going on over here, I'm probably blocking it with this massive like space station that I'm in right now. So or maybe I'm not because you're high enough. Oh, okay. All right. Then I won't be, I'm glad I asked. That way I won't be anxious that you're not getting the whole experience. Geography, sir, is ruinous in its effects on the lower classes. Reading, writing, and arithmetic are comparatively safe, but geography invariably leads to revolution. An underture. This is an archaeology of the dump and opera of pop-ups. It performs a virtual and analog return to the exit in which its author was raised, the dual edge of the township where Whitman was born, bored by the obsolescing mall, on Paumanok punctured by numbers of a Robert Moses gasway. Midway, returning to the freeway of our life after a decade of growth and trans-picturesque climbs, I found myself, through an upbeat feature on rehabbing young artists in the real estate section of the Times, peering into the ExxonMobil petroleum plume below our linoleum in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and over the course of a few related search strings, found that the ex-copper rod mill and free-for-all landfill of the post-industrial cul-de-sac in which she grew up had been placed on the state and national priorities list, meaning that the EPA identified the terrain as among the most toxic in the nation, eligible for cleanup through a super fund of monies. The following maps the everywhere aborting research into the sludge, now only apprehensible as zeros and ones, conducted since discovery of this stultifying fact, a fact whose unabstraction I seem to feel coursing below her motions and through our organs and through the concurrent valves of mom's chemo and the unparalleled afflictions of an increasing toll of friends, unreadied. It's found itself addressing a multinational sprawl of diversified environmental mishaps along the way. The pop-up choruses which interrupt the archaeology sample the syntax and nonsense logics of Lewis Carroll to graft last-ditch pastorals of poetasters from Virgil to Victorians onto the quarrels of buried corpuses. CEOs. The EPA estimated pupils and half-lives of chemical substances, tracing the pathways of a malice in underland that is incompletely virtual, for which responsibility has been rendered abstruse. These pieces score the frustration of de facto digital efforts to apprehend ecochemical calamity as archaeology, disclosing the poem's status as both material and pixelated artifact. They're modeled on those pests of the internet that assailed surfers of yore and today with unsolicited advertisements or warnings, but were wrought in nostalgia for a cut and glue solution, in want of manipulation with the hands. Far along the way, in want, it was found that this story erased itself as I wrote, the settling defendants being permitted by consent decree to begin destroying documents within their possession or control, or that of their contractors or agents, relating to response actions taken at the site, or the liability of any person for response actions conducted at the site, beginning February 22nd, 2006. Along the way, I was plagued by the ethics of disentanglement and the doubt that investigative reporting might suit the business better than poesy, by her damnable need to make music of innermost tragedy, re-encode responsibility, need to emote. When in reading I'm caught in redundancy, it's because we've reached uroboreality, a point of spatio-rhetorical choke. Was no one way went Alice to the global shit list, caught unaware by potential exposures so far off. Oh, to the global shit list, wormy clouds over Mannahatta, distinguished acres of litigious grounds. These mortality patterns also well-begotten and raised by a perfect mother, exposed to beta-benzene hexachloride, also eternal progress, not to encumber his poem with too much business. Starting from fish-shaped Paumanok, potential exposures so far off, oh, and the dark earth resounded about them as they distinguished acres of litigious grounds. These mortality patterns also well-begotten and raised by a perfect mother. Recycling at its best, said Zucker, firms of wall for shutting people up, fatten, pristine, not to encumber his poem with too much business. The poor girl looked down at her rags and in a few years with her unnatural wounds imprinted will depend on volumes of electronically stored information in BP's control. The poor girl looked down at her rags and in few years with her unnatural wounds generated interest, concern, and activity on behalf of a silent world of which we have become the agents. Even if my head would have sung whilst mighty Caesar in his war, on behalf of a silent world of which we have become the agents, shall vex the thrashing floor, the Camorra fruits and vegetables, table 1, box 4, after roaming many lands, aren't completely understood. The existing data shall vex the thrashing floor, 4 feet of clean, sandy fill. Most of the flooring flies, oil spill thus coils the ESI to temporarily close. 4, rely on your vendor. 6, if all else fails, go to court. After roaming many lands, IRE automatically receives and records information on our server, IRE through our contact page, ESI, ebb and flow. To temporarily close, she vanished there. Eurydice toto retherabant flumine repai. The poems in this book that look like regular poems are all read in the voices of different characters, and the characters in this one are Eurydice, Omer, Virgil, and Orfeo. and it's called A Gas Can. Where do we go for landscape growing up on a freeway exit, on the tail end of afterthought drywall development, a 64-tract cul-de-sac penned in between a wire manufacturer, sludge runoff bowl, and an elementary school, photo corners, sag. After mathematics and spelling, we mock picnic on the dump, sliding school children in the fenced-off sump. The curb ash box substitute stomachs blueprints of escape inchoate in the form of dumb mimesis, untrained verbs addressed to fences, storage ongoing in girl flesh. Dug the lead, Pitkin, poured we also domino and hose libations. Dug the lagoons, discharged we hydroxide sludge unto each. Then prayed I.O. many a prayer, sterile bulls of the best heaping the pyre with goods. That was landscape in its 20th century footnote and our first inkling of poesy. Shelter dogs on the transcribed site praised by Mr. Wright from a Blue Ridge porch, 15 years away from reason for being on the page. From the passive gas, ROD closure of school, from the upstart lettings of something ghastly they are, water tower, ports of mother, whom I beat off. Over the fence, picking up Mounds wrappers in discipline circa 1976, litter lessons and commercials seen 14 billion times. Iron Eyes Cody filmed to cry in a canoe because off-gas wasn't placed in a can. From can to stock up while the values bash tillage in all her several parts, stuffing into a mason jar these thumerous appendages, plumes. We seek and re-seek frankness of Wikipedia. This article is about a managed futures fund provider. For toxic waste cleanup, see Superfund. This article appears to be written like an advertisement. Superfund changed its name in 2010 from Superfund Quadriga to Superfund Green. The owner of Superfund paid $2 million for a cameo in Wall Street, Money Never Sleeps. Kindergarten, capped in the mid-aughts and struck from the national priorities list, plume, playground, becoming the slate's blank state. Through innovative planning and creative partnerships, the Sayashut Landfill Superfund site provides valuable municipal amenities and serves as an excellent example of energy conservation in action, goes the EPA, greening the instant before last. The dead trees, we mean trucks, across the street going silver in the grandiose forget, Marmont pavilions of the heart. Sayashut, gimcrack hamlet of the new urbanism. Sayashut Park is a world-class walking village that meets the demands of the 21st century. DPZ creates benevolent urban places in the form of cities, towns, and local sanctuaries. We love to share. We are excited to share our vision with you as we develop the ultimate standard for mixed-use promise made, promise kept, left for soothsay. Survivors and medical Googlers eke their way through servers, the Swiffer thinking doggedly it'll have to do. Cracked the plates of the Shopley Romans, cover the dry conduits. Cooked the motherboards and gamma-minus circuitry where Accra dissolves, inhale the women and children. Beating back zombie and ever cookies, peeling back the treble speak, villager probes stick in, hum the semi-festered dross, as though Idone's fired Persephone were transpiring intact from a cistern come sanctuary dump, as though the lead dispersed, cut with curses, kicked back. Gaia, Hermes, gods of the underworld, receive Venusta, slave of Rufus. Bind Kirkus and his capital and his business and his words and deeds. Hermes of the underworld, restrain them in every way until they become senseless. Ghostery unearths new relic, double-click floodlight, audience science, maximizer, quantcast, 4C tracking this. Beyond the mobile station's stockpile of barbecue lays, the librarian across South Oyster Bay Way, gray, wraps this book in diapers like a corpse. Oh dear. Uh-oh, it's happening again. I think it's haunted.
Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
I might just read, and then I can show the images later.
Did your computer go to sleep or something?
No, not at
Did you
all.
run out of power maybe?
No.
'Cause I don't see any power in your computer there. Okay, now let's see what happens.
Oh dear. Now my computer's freaking out from all this monkey business with the... Oh God.
Exactly, yeah, hold it for a second.
It seemed like it was going to work so perfectly.
I'm just wondering if we maybe killed it.
Well,
One
after
moment,
like
please.
50 times that you know, sometimes it does do that.
Sorry for the confusion.
Okay. Okay. Yes.
Find your video now.
Okay. Yeah, I'll find the video afterwards. Okay.
Sorry about that.
It's okay.
We were back in business.
We're back in business. Barrow full of what? Rome. No, that's a good many voices, hundreds of thous, downwards. Mown them down, crushed them with tolls or fever airs, lessons to learn. A murmur of folk and associated logos. Earnest money rattling in, low creeping in the schoolroom. Travel tarnished of more energetic remedies. Either the well was very deep, route early gathered acute snow sea, and in that case, luckily the salt water hast followed, the red creaming collaborator, and swam slowly, shedding gallons, quite natural, but shut stands the door. Or, stored in a retrieval system, latitude or longitude I've got, shamed, sadly down the middle, shamed. Monstrable seas in trunk exchange, choked and had children digging pretexts, they all moved to the shore, growing and growing, and very soon the waves suck back concern for potential human exposure pathways, see appendix, by the use of this ointment, 1 shilling the box, no more room, belittles in his epic, the stirrings of actions were of eddying forms, as there seemed changes in heart rhythm, and has also swept with confused alarms a final sight out attending to her. Walls recede to erase the night air. So I'm going to read a poem, the language of which comes almost entirely from a set of court documents from suits launched against the town of Oyster Bay with the help of the Environmental Protection Agency against a number of corporations responsible for polluting across the street from my house in the Syosset landfill. And the title of the poem cites Jean Toomer's poem, Her Lips Are Copper Wire, which is a really strange poem that's from the book Cain, which I've always loved, and I've never understood it. Hence, it's like the perfect jumping off point for one's own poem that then you start to understand as you write your own really weird poem. So the reason that I did this, though, was that the prime polluter was the Ciro Wire and Cable Corporation. So it was a copper wire mill, and it was later bought by the Pritzkers. So have any of you heard of piercing the corporate veil? Okay, this was like something that was getting some play, let's say, and around the time of Occupy. And it means dissolving the legal fiction that a corporation is a person like you and me, whose pernicious actions die when the corporation dies or is sold off to another group or assumes another name. So it seems like a really, like, so what, right? But what this actually enabled the government to do was to go after corporations that had dumped like hundreds of thousands of tons of toxic materials into places after the corporations either went bankrupt or made themselves a fancy new name that seemed really fine. Like, let's say if BP, after the BP oil spill, had like just renamed itself, and through a series of different things, it became a different company without piercing the corporate veil, you wouldn't be able to go after them. But this ability to pierce the corporate veil was weakened under George W. Bush especially, and it's enabled corporations to evade responsibility for past wrongdoing. Okay. And if any of you have the book, you would make me very happy if you would help me read this, just in your own whispering voices from the audience, because as a friend of mine, Robert Kochik, says, like, we need to read these names, we need to read these syllables, and we need to kind of encounter them. So I think it would be really cool if anyone who was sitting in their seat with pages 76 and 77 in front of them would like whisper all the weirdest words with me from the audience. And struggling is good. As you can see, I built struggle into the reading so that I always have to be anxious when I'm reading my own poems, because I never know which way to go next. So it's called after Jean Toomer's poem, Till They Are Incandescent. Those are the last words of her lips are copper wire. And this one is in the character of George's. Her lips are Arrowchlor 1248, a type of PCB. Her lips are N-butyl alcohol. Her lips are trace levels of copper, lead, chromium, nickel,
arsenic, mercury, selenium.
191 chloroform, hydrazine, manganese, and phenol. Her lips are
Hydroxides.
Aluminum and iron. Her lips are polynuclear aromatic hydrocarbons and phthalic acid esters, including without limitation di-N-octyl phthalate E, bis 2-ethyl hexyl phthalate F, and diethyl phthalate. More specifically, her lips contained, without limitation, maleic anhydride, esterification, pit scrapings and liquids, plasticizer content of filter cake, plasticizer and solvent content of speedy dry, PCB heat exchange fluid, laboratory wastes, wastes from hookers' concrete pits which contained glycols, tetrachloroethylene, styrene, butadiene, rubber, coagulated latex, purified latex, filter cake, alum, PVC floor scrapings and reactor scrapings, vinyl chloride recovery, still bottoms, vinyl acetate, spent lube oils, waste alcohol, barium and cadmium soap stabilizers. Her lips were bleeding $1 million a month and could not find another supplier. Her lips were the disposal of from hundreds to tens of thousands of tons of waste. Her lips were the alter ego of great American industries. Her lips are Occidental, then known under various hooker names. Her lips are hot-rolled copper rod, steel electrical conduit and strip. Upon information and belief, her lips are a wholly owned subsidiary of Public Loan Company, Inc. Upon information and belief, her lips are existing under the laws of the state of Delaware and authorized to do business in the state of New York with a principal place of business in Chicago, Illinois. Upon information and belief, her lips are a wholly owned subsidiary of a corporation organized and existing under the laws of Japan with principal offices in Tokyo, Japan. Her lips are the successors of the original photo circuits with respect to liabilities arising from activities prior to 1986. Her lips permit citizen suits for wholly past violations. Her lips are parens patriae, trustee, guardian, and representative on behalf of all residents and citizens. Her lips are therefore plainly hearsay. Her lips, in response to the town's interrogatories, may also have contained, inter alia, toluene, xylene, methyl ethyl ketone, trichloroethylene, chloroform, vinyl chloride, and dichloroethylene. Her lips are etchants in 55-gallon drums. Her lips should bear the costs for any harms. Her lips are the outstanding capital stock of Midland Corporation. Why then, her lips are done. Her lips are in the soil, groundwater, and gas emissions. Her lips are a common law claim for unjust enrichment based upon defendants' failure to abate the public nuisance. Her lips allege that any of the great American defendants disposed of waste. Their lips dispute whether that sludge was in fact hazardous. Her lips must do more than simply show that there is some metaphysical doubt as to the material facts. Her lips agreed that even good faith successors have enjoyed the benefits of their predecessors' disposal of waste. Her lips are successors to generators. Her lips are the continuity of enterprise. Her lips are based on a traditional veil-piercing analysis. Her lips are a matter of sharp dispute. Her lips are a public nuisance. In the absence of specific statutory authority, her lips may not use CERCLA's general goal to effectuate a revolution. Her lips are no evidence that states are engaging in a race to the bottom. Furthermore, her lips would potentially interfere with existing commercial relationships. Her lips will wind down in the next 10 years to a program whose chief function is emergency response. Her lips are orphan sites. Her lips have been released into the environment at and from the landfill within the meaning of the word release as defined at 42 U.S.C. 960122. Her lips are spilling, leaking, pumping, pouring, emitting, emptying, discharging, injecting, escaping, leaching, dumping, or disposing into the environment. Her lips' silence is dispositive. Her lips are not time-barred. Her lips were described in another NCDOH document as a white-blue liquid with the consistency of heavy latex paint. Her lips will continue to incur response costs. Her lips constitute mere conjecture at best.
channels, more choices. Organize your Arm & Hammer Dianetics, plastics pioneers, marvelous benefits, $0 down this weekend only, July 3rd through 5th, millipixel by millipixel. There are many ways to suck the fat. Call us biased, but we prefer HD liposuction, heart-to-heart varicose vein treatment in Tarzana and Beverly Hills. Just what you were hoping for. Swisher Sweets. 4 easy ways to join your city, skymall.com, Broadway, Mile High Literature, reached by Wiki, books, Intimissimi, Arm & Hammer, City Core, Mirage of Amiens, everywhere you want to be. Don't let anyone take away their home, damage of your Luftwaffe, and pharmacy now open for dinner. Thirsty? Explore Earth and beyond. Get over 145 channels, 0% imperial workforce, free class, an ideal balance of softness and strength. The undead will be sun chips, speeds up to 1 gig, life size, evolving together, micro exhibitions and collaborators, objects and voices, a collection of stories reach $116 value, $122 value, $128 value, $130 value, $132 value, $140 value, $142 value, $160 value, summer sale, farm to real estate, under 500 calories, now stays fresher longer, bonus, twine and controller included, Disney princess and controller included. I have crossed into dizzy spells, pure, fresh, Black Friday into dizzy spells, beyond, angel, soft, eagle's eye view, sun chips, speeds up to 1 gig, crunchy at the smart, an extra 10% off, women and children, first reach, $156 value, $164 value, $170 value, $180 value, $182 value, the undead will be, objects and voices, $140 value, organic Tuscan new breakfast crisps, the undead will be, come on, miss out, welcome to the neighborhood. Nothing says welcome to the neighborhood like a stack of cash. Crunchy, our paths have crossed.
Let me add, for I feel I have drifted into far too serious receptrix, sister, on the bank, some armed vein of blaze, of disco rice, lip-wiratorio of the state of itself, of Oz. In the breastpin I plucked of Oz, synodos, golden of the state of disco rice, of all the unjust things, of estrogens, golden blaze. So pop goes the absolutely secure, absolutely personal contrada, commingled and administressed clays, Coney Island whitefish make the wink wink, the culpable fog stirring events jerks the internest, its motor orderly into the XOXO stirring events obsolete, uneconomic, the wink wink, the culpable fog of rhetoric, Coney Island whitefish make clays, cutting up earl cloth for slingshots, transmetallsome. Well, either the locks were incompletely intimate, transmetallsome, juiced up jersey, syringe, broad-harrowed bay, or into the vomitorium exodus, which might have been borrowed from the spring effulgence. At any rate, the wells of fancy and Trojan nubility, how stiffly showed she got guts. Now, sentiment for the unemployed, trinkets, moan, how stiffly showed sentiment puked the dead. Sentiment fuxed the nienter next. Thank you. My understanding is that you get to have a cookie, and if you would like, I'm going to show some clips of ways in which this piece that that you so graciously held for me has been mobilized in other contexts and other landscapes, and talk more informally about what on earth I'm doing here with this material. So, hope to see you. Yes, sure. I mean, I don't mind, but I don't want to lose them, so. So I'm going to say a few things and show you one clip, and then we can just open it up for discussion. So, what does it mean to stalk your own home? Over the past decade or so, I've become fascinated by the digestive system of the global city, mistaken for a birth canal, wanting to reproduce it in poetry as a series of mouths. Electric, lips that are copper wire. That's required digging and invocation of many and sundry descents into the underworld. Homer's Odyssey, Book 11, and its translation in Ezra Pound's first canto, Virgil's own Orpheus, and translation to the favelas of Rio as Orfeo do Carnaval, or Black Orpheus, Dante's comedy, Lewis Carroll's Alice, and their translators. I scored this book to reproduce the vertigo of digging through this archive, but also for something like the therapeutics of disgust, to unearth the sick lyricism beneath poisonous acronyms, to create something like a memory cycle in which the memory of your childhood commercials from Cantu, stock up while the values bash, fell as they are, produce a rhythmical, pleasingly pulsing, phatic sense that things are going to be all right. One longs for succor in the face of potential mother loss, even if that's an infuriating promise given our conditions of contamination. To locate and score something like a memory immersion and jolt, a trance state alternating with shock. And Io, a multivalent character who stars in Correggio's Jupiter and Io, a painting that glorifies rape and suggests pollution as Jove appears in the form of a cloud or poisonous smoke, who appears as Jupiter's vengeful moon in an open feed. Io is also the fourth largest moon, and it has over 400 active volcanoes. Io continues as a split duet between input and output in the sequel to this book, which is in progress and provisionally called Their Lips Are Copper Liars. As I try out new methods of shoveling into history, I'm literalizing this procedure in a book about minds, which is precisely the thing Lewis Carroll wanted to avoid seeming to write about, a warding off which was accomplished by retitling Alice's Adventures Underground into Alice in Wonderland. And this is a letter to his friend in which he says, I first thought of Alice's Adventures Underground, but that was pronounced too like a lesson book in which instruction about mines would be administered in the form of a grill. The master plans, the jingles, and the street chants will tell you it's going to be all right. Meanwhile, you can control the lyricism of your disaster, even if you can't control the disaster itself. How could one conduct an archaeology of responsibility for liminal yet sprawling global and local disasters like the disaster of toxic waste? I wasn't able to dig into the landfill at home, but as compensatory gesture for several years with choreographer Kathy Westwater and architect Sung Jae Lee, I was granted special access to the workings of Fresh Kills landfill in New York, a massive, reticent monument to the culture of consumption and planned obsolescence, which received a majority of New York City's waste for 50 years. These 150 million tons of trash as sheer lumpen mass resist eloquence. They resist articulation, in fact, as anything but park, now capped, but amounting to 2,200 acres of hillscape risen from a disquieted estuary along the western seams of Staten Island, and haunted by the remains of 9/11. In capping, impermeable plastic and other materials are spread over landfills to try to prevent the contamination of rainwater flowing into water bodies. And what they don't catch is now processed, becoming this triumphant and delectable liquid which gets dumped back into New York Harbor to mingle with other ambiguities in disquieting skies. A hybrid landscape, more human residuum than land. The site's history tends to get into your lungs, though, being under perpetual risk of methane fire. That Fresh Kills landfill encompasses roughly the size of Lower Manhattan, almost 3 times the size of Central Park, transmits no sense of what it's like to stand amidst one of the world's most populous urban agglomerations, surrounded by nothing but hill grasses and sky, disrupted only by the occasional crook of a passive release methane pump. To deal with this condition of trash hands-on represented part of a heritage for me, continued by my grandfather, who worked in salvage, recycling, or as he insisted on calling it, junk. I realized early on in this project that it had to get into the vocal cords of others, and that its would-have-been arias would necessitate balks to breathing and challenges to the chorus line, transposed to the digestive masses of the mounds. My collaboration with Kathy Westwater on Park, which sought to score the destruction and creation of natural and semi-natural worlds and the transformation of landscape from trauma to commons, emerged from our mutual interests in the uncanny sublimity of Fresh Kills landfill and in a broader relationship between landscape, language, and the body. For 4 years, with architect Jay Lee and dancers, we exchanged practices to mingle utopian aspirations for remediation with the indigestible, the residual. We created scores that interrogate the pathways of desire, waste, and biological retribution at this landfill and beyond through movement, textscapes, and design. We solicited responses to the landscape's contexts and then remurmured them across would-be telephone lines, alongside the hissing Leda-like methane pumps. As resident poet, I formulated a verbal and material archive of the indigestible contents of the garbage mounds, amalgamating research conducted online, field notes, and oral testimonies to transmit the afterlife of consumption habits being broken down under our feet. I proposed a score of linguistic remains that could be trailed and vocalized, nodded, or pulled taut in chorus lines. We wove choruses from waste, stringing language from poems and garbage together as voices from the underground, and deploying them in performance as dysfunctional kites or querulous marionettes to sing. The vaguely sickening wind was an unanticipatedly emphatic performer in these events, making apt dunce caps of our ad hoc cornucopias and megaphones, making for a kineticism of salvaged song. At Pratt Institute, we composed a sonnet based on my score for salvaging the language of junk. The piece was choral, with the wind above all singing to the choir. I scored the mapping of this language onto the body of a performer who became a difficult reading instrument. So now I'm just going to show you a clip. And I realize I have to do this again since we got disconnected. Uh-oh. It's not giving me the option of the output. External device. Back. I'm going to show you this, but it would be kind of better if I could show it to you with sound. Do you remember what he said? Audio controls, podium. Well, you know what? I might need to just play it from my computer. It's going to be... Oh, yeah, I'll put the microphone on. Can you kind of hear that? Okay. Okay. I'm just going to play you a couple of minutes of this. Okay, so maybe since I don't hear it coming enough through, I'll just stop there and we can just open it up. I can keep this playing, or if it's distracting, then I'll stop it. Maybe it's distracting. Here. It gets more and more intense as they, yeah, as they kind of stalk her. And these two performers are wrestling with the primary dancer, Belinda Huh, and then this other person, Kay Audinger, is trying to formulate verbal, lines of poetry that are coherent out of the fragments that the performers are picking out of this kind of trash being. So I just wanted to show you that because it's one of the things in this book that existed in multiple forms, and as you can see, I continue to use the materials. These strings were strung up onto a room, which stanza literally means room in Italian. So the strings that we were reading from here were strung up in a different way, and they were performed in a different way. But now I would just like to kind of hear from you. If you have questions about what it means to work with research, transmit that into poetry. If you have questions about what it means to translate poetry into other media or anything else, if you're angry about the EPA or you think the EPA should be destroyed, and I'm also totally interested in talking about that, anything. Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you do research for something like this? Like, what kind of form does doing research for a creative project take that may be similar or different to doing research for a scientific research paper or something?
Yeah, so research has become like a buzzword in the arts now, I've noticed, and sometimes it means, hey, I saw this epigraph by Derrida, or I saw this Shakespeare epigraph in a book by Derrida that I then didn't read, and I'm going to make a whole project around that. And I kind of disapprove of that, calling that research, because that's just appropriation to me. And appropriation is, as you know, like a very hot thing, and postmodernism and all that. But for me, I think I always am very serious about the ways in which I'm putting bits together. So for me, I'm very interested in digging up archives that are not available, like stories that are not available. And for me, this has meant a lot of things. So in the case of finding out through some internet searches that, in fact, it was highly likely that my mom had cancer because I grew up across the street from a national priority of the Environmental Protection Agency. So what next? I couldn't go and dig and do a chemical analysis because I'm not a scientist. I'm just a poet. So you can imagine how frustrating that is, being like, well, I'm not an activist, who's working on environmental policy. I'm not a scientist. Like, what can I possibly do? So I ended up digging into the EPA documentation that is online, that's totally endangered, by the way, now, for very obvious reasons. In fact, the Superfund archives disappeared for a while. They're probably back up now, but it just made me realize that I'd better download everything I used for the book before it's completely destroyed. In other cases, that means, of course, that means reading books on the topic. So I read books like a book called Gone Tomorrow by Heather Rogers, which was the history of garbage in the US. And it was so incredibly fascinating. I felt like, you could tell the whole history of the 20th century through garbage. I felt like I learned more about my family through this book than a book that would, you know, talk about World War I and II, because it just so happens that my family had more connection to salvage business and all this than it did to those particular wars that get spoken about in history books. But how it differs from scientific research is that it doesn't try to like paper over what's unknown. So for me, there's a epigraph to this book, which also comes from Jean Toomer's "Their lips are copper wires." Oh gosh, her lips are copper wire. And the last lines go, "Then with your tongue remove the tape so they are incandescent," which is a really bizarre, surreal kind of image where these lips that are kissing, like if you strip away the tape from the wires, then there will be a spark when the two people kiss. So I used "then with your tongue remove the tape" as an epigraph. And to me, that meant remove the red tape, remove the tape that's putting these things together, because the story that's being told officially is totally not true. And it's completely covering up so many details about what happened. So the Environmental Protection Agency is our friend, but the accounts that the EPA gives are totally inconclusive as to the effects of things like toxic waste on local neighborhoods. So I wanted to route that information that they had culled from me and other information that I could cull into different kinds of lyrical structures that point out the ludicrousness, the kind of dissembling of like official explanations for things that are meant to make us feel great about the landscape that we inhabit, when we really should be on like high red alert, basically. So I used lyricism because that's something that I am really interested in, like the effects of rhyme. And I'm interested in what happens when you have like a rhyming, assonant poem or piece of literature that's shot through with uncomfortable information. So everyone, basically, to like distill what I just said, one thing is finding your own archive, like not taking someone else's, but finding the archives that interest you. And the second thing is finding a form that will animate those archives. That's what it means to me. And, you know, that formula is completely open. You know, it's not prescriptive, because form can take many, many forms, and archives can be made of anything. They can be photographs, they can be oral histories, they can be, you know, actually going to libraries and looking at archives. So, does that answer your question? Other curiosities?
Just maybe to follow up on what you were saying about archive just now, which seems to emphasize the sort of verb nature, the act of archiving, like making an archive versus simply one in research can think of only visiting places. So the sort of act of bringing things together and that constituting an archive. And it seems like something about that activity animates for you the process of making lyrical form or something. And I don't know, just something about what the action and how
Bringing together the materials.
Yeah, just, you know, what that is for you, what
Yeah.
that activates in you, the process of like sort of constructing that yourself or bringing those materials together yourself rather than a sort of preformed.
Yeah. Like, this is why plagiarism is just the worst, because why would you want to reproduce someone else's thought? Anyway, like, reproduce all what they think is the important thing to look at when confronting a problem. But for me, bringing it together has meant more and more doing things, weird things that, like, poets aren't expected to do, like going and just walking on fresh kills with a bunch of dancers. Defamiliarizing yourself with your own methods. So as a writer, like, you're taught that, I don't know, you're not really even taught. Like, you're supposed to go in front of a blank page or a screen and things to come out. But even the ancients had a more complicated answer for how that worked, which was that you were inspired, you breathed in this other deity, or, you know, you did soothsaying, you know, activities, which you would read things and interpret them. So, you know, this whole idea of the blank page seems to be a modern invention of inventiveness and of originality and genius, and this whole idea of the individual genius. It's more interesting to me to kind of be like a rag picker among materials, and that could mean anything. So, you know, as I mentioned, like, for dancers, research, it looks very strange to a writer. Like, going and walking, literally walking on Fresh Kills landfill for these dancers was like the most revelatory thing. And I was kind of like, what's the big deal? You know, but they are so, their feet feel all of the, like, that it's not land. It's not land, but it's rather a bunch of garbage with a, like, impermeable plastic on top of it, so it feels really weird. So walking around with these dancers, I'm like, yeah, okay, this thing doesn't support us. It could explode at any point. It could sink at any point, and it's almost as though they were more aware of that than I was. Or literally just working with your hands. So as you can see from that object, the trash text, that was a really demanding thing, to bring these pieces of garbage together, to actually confront that, to confront the material, the mylar, the plastic, the paper, the cardboard, and like to just have to deal with it and carry it around. I've continued to do it because I have this dream of making a massive textile with all this stuff. And then giving myself the constraint of having to make some kind of sense out of things that are almost by default nonsensical, because their only aim is to get you to buy. And to try to reroute the message, consume, 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 to like something darker. So there were many different methods of making, and then the only problem is, how do you cram that back into a book? Which is why it ended up being called Outtakes and Scores, from an archaeology and pop-up opera of the corporate dump, like to signal that a lot was outside, and I brought it in, but it's really like a score for something that happened outside when language was roving amidst like these landscapes and across different people's voices.
Fair question. Yeah.
I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the kind of chorus that you sort of created today in like two separate ways. First in the kind of, right, like speaking out these names, but then also with the pieces themselves, because it seems slightly distinct from like the collaboration you're describing. So I just wonder how you think about that kind of a.
Yeah. So first of all, I've never done that
Before with the whispering of the Till They Are Incandescent, so you guys are awesome. Thank you. But I do have a friend who's been, I'd say, an interlocutor for this project since since it really got going off the ground, which was in 2008 when I made a bunch of these visual pieces. And he helped me perform them, and he's an architect and he's married to a choreographer. They have something called the Commons Choir. So we have a lot in common in terms of our interest. And after I read that piece, Till They Are Incandescent, he was like, it's really important for us to say those words. And in fact, a lot of people have said that very thing to me, because they're like, yeah, when I read it in the book, my eyes kind of glaze over. But when you're trying to say it out loud, it's the most oppressive possible thing to confront these chemical substances. So I just had the idea today of having you read with me, and I'm very interested in improvisation and the discomfort of that, so and putting myself in an uncomfortable relationship to promote liveness, because like once a book comes out, usually my relationship is that it's dead, but with this particular book, it's very personal to me, and it was in press during the election, and then the most barbaric things have happened since then, and I think that it's important to keep it alive, this book, even though it was outraged at things that were much better in a way than what is happening right now. So a way of keeping it live is to do something different, even though you don't know if people will cooperate or not. Then I have kind of like threaded the trash text through an audience before, and I am interested in, even if you don't like say that much, I'm kind of interested in having people have to deal with this object, because it's not dirty, like it's all magazines or whatever, but having to have that slight complicity or responsibility for something that was supposed to be discarded long ago in 2000, at this point, 14 or 13, I forget. So that was like the news, and now this history is embedded, this wayside history is embedded in the object. So I'm kind of interested in reversing the stage dynamic, and suddenly, like the first time I did it, I knew someone in the audience that I could hand it to, and I knew she'd be up for it. But then the next person that I gave it to, I also knew her, and she didn't want to deal with it. It was like, oh my God, I'm an audience member, like, please don't, like, just leave me alone. I'm supposed to be a spectator here. But yeah, it's just like a participatory dynamic that's very light, but I've had all different kinds, like in presenting the pieces, the pop-ups. I've like given these to people, and I've had, at first, at first I only read them with other people. I'm trying to look for, I would give them like geographical zones in the text, and it was always the most nerve-wracking possible thing, because you don't know if people are going to do it or not. Or so the first reading with this person, Robert Kochik and Daria Fayin and Stephanie Barber, we were in 4 different corners of the room, and the language was activated from the 4 different corners of the room. Then when the dancers were working with it, they literally mapped the text onto their bodies, and as they said the word, they would activate that part of their body. And it was really revelatory for me. I thought that the pieces were about landscape and had nothing to do with humans until humans were reading them. And then I realized this is all about bodies. Oh my God, like this is about my mom's body, my body, everybody's body that is dealing with this chemical aftermath. So it also, like, just selfishly, I learn something when it's being routed through other people's voices. So thank you for being such good sports about that, because sometimes people do freak out.
Well, thank you so much for coming. Like I said, there are books. There's also, I should mention, in the library, this book, but also from
Dame
Quickly. And then there's another book that's with you and Atal Adnan, and it's like a collaborative. So they'll look in the library if you're interested in further books too, and check them out. They were on display, but then they recently have gone back into the stacks. So
okay.
go make your own archive in the stacks and include those.
Great, thank you so much.
Amazon's computers to do so.
Okay, Darwin, yeah, I can meet you over in front of my.
Oh, are you going to get around?
Yeah, he's gonna ride. And wait, you two are riding over together, right? And then we'll switch and go direct.
I do have some more comments.
Okay, awesome.
Well, we're a nice. Yeah, we'll be able to.
Should I hit the list?
especially think it's cold outside, so you dress up for cold. Then you pour sweat when you are walking. I feel that. It's so